Hello and welcome to the MLB on the RotoRadar podcast. My name is Joshua Riemer. I'm joined by none other than the man, the myth, the legend, Jared Block. Jared, how are you doing this fine Friday afternoon, sir?
Yeah, happy Friday, everyone. I know that today is technically a little bit of a holiday for us as it's the last day of our NBA season. So that is making me happy today. Uh, the weather is making me happy today as well. Finally, what seems to be the last day under 40 degrees for a while, Josh. I'm just going to jinx myself, but that's where we're at today in Milwaukee. So, yeah, I think that yesterday's slate, was kind of a bummer with all the postponements, with Coors being a bust. We have a 5-game slate today on one site and 6 on the other, and it should be an interesting Friday night. First smaller Friday night compared to last week.
Yeah, for sure. Only 6 games on the docket. Was kind of shocked to see that they had a lot of day games today, but it's
Mhm.
the way the cookie crumbles sometimes. And luckily, we still have 6 games to talk about it. And it's not 4 games like it was yesterday. So excited to talk about it with you. Excited to get into some of these games. It's still cold where I am. We can't kick this cold. I mean, I say cold. It's in the mid 50s, so it's not all that bad. But yeah, not exactly great weather here. I'm glad you're getting some good weather though, and hopefully we can have a good night on this MLB slate.
Yep, just some housekeeping here. We have a 6-game slate, on FanDuel. So 6 games on FanDuel, 5 games on DraftKings. The FanDuel slate locks at 6:40 p.m. Eastern with the first game, and then obviously the DraftKings slate locks a little bit later at 7:20 Eastern. We're going to cover this first game here. It's going to be Oakland and Tampa. So again, this game is only on FanDuel for those of you who are playing over there. Right now, the Athletics are coming in as a plus 225 moneyline underdog on the road here. Tampa, the host, minus 275 at home. Zach Eflin on the mound versus Waldichuk here. 7.5 is the total for this game. So right off the bat, going to be one of the lowest game totals on the board. Kind of happy that FanDuel gave us this game because it does give people at least another option for your starting pitcher and Zach Eflin. We have noticed that the Rays have just taken a whole new approach to these pitching these pitching guys, and so how does that going to affect today's slate? And is there at least a conversation to be had that Eflin could be somebody that you could rely on as an SP1 today?
Yeah, I think so. Excuse the technical difficulties we're having with some of the web browsers on the stream, but we can still talk through this. Yeah, I think that there is a good spot for Eflin today. He carries a lot of upside against a Tampa Bay team that has not been doing that well to start out the year. So I like this Eflin spot, and I think there is certainly upside here. I worry a little bit about what they did with him last time out against Detroit. You know, they ended up getting up by so much, they ended up limiting his pitch count. And
Right.
they could do the same scenario today. You know, they're minus 275 favorites over in Oakland. So wouldn't be a shocker to see this Rays team get up by a bunch, end up limiting Eflin to some regard. Not seeing him get his full pitch count would be a spot where you get a little bit iffy on that price tag. But the upside is certainly there, and it gives you a pivot off of Kershaw today.
Right, and that's the main thing here. Obviously, this doesn't apply to DraftKings, where the SP2 conversation is a bit more interesting. But yeah, I think that could be something we could look at. Sorry, dealing with a cough here right now.
You're all good. I could take over here. Talking about this other side, talking about Waldichuk a little bit. We know Waldichuk isn't a very good pitcher. We know the guy definitely has struggled against righties in the past. Came over from that Yankees organization in the Montas trade. And, he's young. He's still progressing. But we saw the numbers last year. Wasn't necessarily all that good. We saw the numbers to start out the year, possibly even worse than they were last year. And you have a Tampa Bay team that has a bunch of guys that can hit lefties well. So I think Wander Franco, Paredes, Diaz, Rosarina, Harold Ramirez, even all of these guys deserve some consideration and could potentially be a top FanDuel stack at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think this game just helps in general to kind of, like I said, give you more options on this slate. DraftKings is going to be a lot of the a lot of the Coors game, a lot of Clayton Kershaw. So I think that the Rays are just fine here. Again, I think it just gives you another team to talk about today, which is nice on FanDuel. So maybe we'll see a little bit more inflated ownership because of the fact that it's a little bit earlier, but we'll have to see here. I think that We've rostered the Rays a lot, so we kind of know what to expect from them at this point, and I think this is a good matchup.
Yeah, I certainly agree. I think it's a good matchup as well. And it's definitely a spot where this Rays team has been one of the best offenses of the season so far. So it's hard not considering them a top option for today's slate. In terms of FanDuel, what exactly I want, because we can only roster these guys on FanDuel, I think at the end of the day, really a lot of interest in Yandy Diaz, like I mentioned. Wander Franco has to be one of the better spend ups on the slate. I know his price tag's all the way up at 4K, but he's been consistently paying it off. He's averaging nearly 20 FanDuel points a slate right now, so I like the spot there. And then I think another guy that I really like is a lefty smashel, Harold Ramirez. And we usually get Harold at a pretty cheap price tag. That conversation is no different today, where you get him at 2,200 in the 5-hole. I think it's a really good spot for him and a spot that I can certainly be on today.
Yeah, you could even see yourself or talking yourself into just with how cheap this team is, especially Ramirez. I think Diaz could have been a little bit more expensive for the last week that he's had. This is a stack that will help you get to Kershaw or Woodruff, and then or spending up in general. So I think that's extremely viable there. And that's why you think that Tampa kind of moves up the totem pole a little bit for the FanDuel slate. Last note on here, I don't think we don't really need to talk people into Tampa more, but one last final point here is that while, Waldichuk can strike out righties, he did it at a 21% clip in the previous season here, we only have 3 guys that strike out at higher than 20%. The first 6 batters in this lineup all strike out less than 19%, which with the Rosarina being the highest, but a lot of these guys are closer to that 10 to 12% mark, which is crazy to see. Like Yandy Diaz has a 5% K rate against lefties in the last year and a half.
Yeah, and we kind of, I don't know. I respect Waldichuk. I think he's a talented pitcher. We didn't see that swinging strike stuff, at least to start out the year. But obviously early, things can change. I don't think they changed today, though, against the Rays. That's it. No Oakland exposure for me. I'll stay away from that team, and we can move on as long as you're ready.
Yeah, actual projection of a pitch count for Zach Eflin, because I feel like you'll need to get close to you'll have to get 90 pitches to roster him at 88.
I mean, I don't know.
Can he get you the quality start today, I guess, is the better question.
Yeah, he can if the game stays close, but that's something that I would say probably doesn't happen. I say they could limit. It's not a limitation thing in terms of him. He could have gone 100 pitches in that last game against Detroit. They just don't feel a need to, overpitch him when they don't feel a need to overpitch him when the fact of the matter is that like they need him for later in the season. So I think that's the only reason that he didn't get a full pitch count in the last game.
Right. Well, so yeah, sure, Eflin has changed teams, but the same pitching staff applies, same management applies here for Tampa, where they are very quick to make changes to pitching because of where they're at in certain things. So I don't know, a very analytical approach team. Maybe we'll see him only go 5, and if he goes 5 and gets you 7 strikeouts at the price tag, it's good. But on the whole slate, I don't think it's going to do the job.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, San Diego, Atlanta is next. Right now, the Padres are coming in as a plus 108 underdog on the road here. The Braves minus 126 at home. 9.5 is the total here with a little bit of juice towards the under there. Nick Martinez versus Schuster here. This is going to be the only game that actually has some severe weather risk here. I know this is kind of something that's going to happen the most of the year in terms of like Atlanta being a weather spot. It's going to happen again for today specifically. Looks like we're going to have a lot of activity early on in terms of weather risk, and then it kind of should ease out here. I wouldn't be surprised to see this game get delayed for an hour and then start. But how are we approaching this spot here? And I believe, maybe I'm wrong, I think that this is Atlanta's first home game.
Yeah, I think it is. Maybe it's Atlanta's first home game. I'll have to go look at that afterwards. But I think they end up playing it. I think most likely, you get you get an hour and a half delay, and then they end up playing all the way through. Also, I think it's notable to say that the Padres are in town too. Like this is a team that's top of the
Mm,
line when it comes to the NL. They spent so much money on
confirmed.
stars, and it is their first
Confirmed
home
first
game.
home game. Yep.
Yeah, okay. So I think they should end up playing this one. I think they'll do all they can to end up playing this one. And so I expect like an hour and a half delay, and then they end up playing through the night, which is going to be pretty seamless in all honesty. If that's the case, I do have some interest in this Atlanta team. They have one of the highest implied run totals on the slate, fourth highest when you're considering all these night games. And I feel like there is definitely some spots that I can get exposure to with how good this Atlanta team has been. And Nick Martinez, I think he's a solid pitcher, but I know lefties can't get to him. So Matt Olson, Michael Harris, as long as he's in the lineup, Ozzy Albies, all definitely potential options because we know Martinez has been struggling against lefties.
Slight tweak to what I said. It's the first Friday, first weekend is more of what I meant. They played yesterday, so
Gotcha. Okay.
these two teams played yesterday. But anyway, really really close game, 7-6 last night, and I think the same thing applies all series. Where I think these teams know that they are some of the best teams in the MLB, and so yeah, lots at stake here. I think they're going to do everything they can to get this one in play, and they don't have an off day anytime soon. So I think that they're going to just push it back a little bit, and it should play through just fine afterwards. So can't agree on the Atlanta stuff. When it comes to, so I think again, unless you disagree, we'll take Coors as we take it when we get there. But we also need to be looking like yesterday for that mini stack. And yesterday it happened to be the San Francisco Giants of all teams. And then I think today you can take a look at the Dodgers. You can take a look at potentially the Angels. I also think the Braves are very close to being in that conversation as well, if not already in there.
Yeah, I can get behind all that. I don't know. We'll get to Washington when we get to Washington.
Yeah.
That's a mute point until we get there. But I like this Atlanta team. I think they definitely have some stack potential here. At least the lefties do. And yeah, I don't mind going there.
All right. On the other side, these Padres. Let's go ahead, and I know that you probably have some deeper diving on Schuster here. Obviously, the xFIP doesn't look good in a limited sample size, and I think that's just the capability of this Padres offense. Any time that they get out of Petco Park needs to be highly considered. Like it's already a good offense, and it looks like they're starting to heat up a little bit. Bogarts. Obviously, I know it's only been like 6 games, but definitely looking worth the move at this point.
Yeah, for sure. Probably. I saw someone on Twitter somewhere say they probably got a steal on getting him at 280
Maybe. Yeah.
for that 11-year deal, and I would somewhat agree with that. He's been amazing, so it'll be interesting to see if he can continue that. And I would say he probably can against the lefty today in Schuster. He's really been the only guy in the top 5 of this lineup that can hit a lefty well. And he's generated a lot of power against lefties. His hard hit rate is all the way up to a very high number so far against lefties this season. Schuster just doesn't seem like he has the major league stuff quite yet. Maybe he'll develop into it, but we got to remember he didn't have a lot of experience in AAA, had under 50 innings over there last season, and then really mainly just a double-A pitcher. So it's going to take him some time to get acclimated. He has some plus stuff. His changeup's very good. His command's very good, but we're going to have to wait and see if it can continue to translate.
Yep, absolutely. So I do like Bogarts and what he brings to the table today. I do like Atlanta more. So I think you're taking a tournament approach here, or maybe you're just doing a one-off. Don't know if it's any. I mean, I think that some of these plays are in the cash player pool, but I think that you also just need to consider where you're getting at when you're rostering guys that are pretty expensive and who you want to go with that. Like if you're going to go with Bogarts, you have to just note that you're probably not able to pay up for a Dodger that you may need later on in the slate. So there's that. But then I think this game overall has some severe upside here. Like I know that the bullpens certainly can be respectable, but I think that the game, like we've seen Atlanta, doesn't matter what matchup so far, at least to start the year, seem to be breezing right along and really no stopping from what they did last year.
Yeah, well, that bullpen has been struggling, so it gets to a spot where Schuster gets backed up by a really bad bullpen. I could see it even being more in play that we end up potentially looking at these Padres bats and maybe more tournament based stuff, but still some upside there. And maybe even it's just prop stuff. I'd love to see. I'll
Yeah.
check it. I have the screen in front of me where Xander is at right now. Yeah, you get everything for Xander on the board, 8.5 hitter fantasy score, 1.5 hits, runs, and RBIs. I'd probably take hits, runs, and RBIs, but there's a lot of Xander upside here that I could see playing out.
Yep, works out. We all know that leadoff guy on the road gets that ninth inning should work
Yep.
out. And if they put up 6 runs, like I think that it's very similar to what happened yesterday could happen today, if not maybe even a more likely outcome. Yeah, I think that that's the way to go as well. Is there any chance you think that we'll get an in-game delay if they decide that they want to start around the same time as what it's projected as? I'm just
Potentially.
saying for like, yeah, for the fact of Schuster maybe not finishing, right?
Yeah, potentially. We do end up seeing them go that direction. If they end up starting this one, it would be a detriment because it would definitely mean that we're going to see a spot where they're going to delay it in game. I don't think they play through these conditions. They seem like some big storms, so I'd be
Yeah.
shocked if they ended up playing through stuff. So maybe you do see Schuster end up not going the full 5, or
Yeah.
however long he's going to go.
All right. Something to look at. I mean, we also know that ballpark crews can be a little bit more conservative when it comes to weekend starting opening stuff, like the opening Friday of the season. So maybe we'll get that call about a delay soon. But again, we feel pretty confident that it should play through once the storm clears up. So let's go ahead and let's move on to the other side here and talk about the next game in the Milwaukee Brewers and the St. Louis Cardinals. Right now, the St. Louis Cardinals are coming in as a plus 134 money line underdog. The Brewers minus 158 at home. We have Jack Flaherty against Brandon Woodruff today. 8.5 is the total here. And the first things first, I think that maybe this spot, and this is a great talking point right off the bat. Flaherty pitched really well the other day. Maybe it was a combination of luck and just him turning the corner. But he also gets a red hot Brewers offense that put up like 20 plus runs on the Mets in 3 games. So which side's going to benefit today?
You say pitched well. I see a guy who had 7 walks in 5 innings. His location
Yeah,
is
he
not
did
there.
walk a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, he was walking quite a few guys. I think Flaherty's still struggling. He had a lot of struggles in spring training. I think while that Toronto team wasn't able to get any hits, substantial hits in that one, I do also think that the location is still off for Flaherty right now. So I definitely see some upside with this Milwaukee team. Like you mentioned, they're red hot. That's something that I could definitely get behind attacking. I kind of struggle with who exactly I would want here, though, in all honesty. If we're looking for that guy who has been hot against righties, I guess you'd be going to the bottom of the lineup and going Mitchell and Terrain,
Yeah.
going the young kids, but maybe that's a savings option for you. But yeah, I'm not really sure where to go with Flaherty right now and what to consider here because I'm not taking the top of this lineup most likely.
Yeah. I could see people looking at Christian Yelich or Rowdy Tellez. I'm not there as much today. It has just been a lot of the young guys. And I know this doesn't really apply to this matchup, but Brian Anderson's been out of his mind for somehow, not sure. But yeah, Terang, Mitchell, those guys I think I like the most.
Yeah, I can certainly get behind those guys. Outside of that, not interested in this Milwaukee team. Definitely not interested in Flaherty. Like I said, I think the location's off. I watched that whole game for Flaherty, and I just think that I think he's going to be struggling here for a little bit.
Certainly could. On the other side, Brandon Woodruff, outside of Burns, which by the way, Corbin Burns, man, I can't think we can roster him for a while until he gets it together. But Brandon Woodruff looked better than he did and had a solid start against the Cubs. I never really loved targeting him against St. Louis specifically. I mean, it happens a lot, right? It happens a ton during the year. They play each other a lot. Had some really awesome K stuff against lefties over the last year plus. It's still there against righties too. How are you feeling about? Because he does feel like your second option on DraftKings, and you can make a case that he is one of the better pitchers on the slate. It's just the caliber of offense that he's going up against today.
Yeah, he's going up against St. Louis team that doesn't strike out, has one of the lowest K rates on the board out of any team in the MLB against right-handed pitching, and has just one of the best offenses against right-handed pitching. So we've seen him have good spots against the St. Louis team before. You go back to last year, he faced off against them 3 times. One game went 5 innings, 0 earned runs, only had 2 strikeouts though, so it didn't end up being a very DFS viable performance. Another performance, he got shelled in. Then in another performance, he nearly touched 60 FanDuel points. So we've surely seen the up and downs of Woodruff in this matchup. I would say stay away from it on FanDuel. I think you have a better guy in Kershaw that you can go to in cash. In terms of DraftKings, where you kind of need to find your second pitcher, and it's not in these first 2 games, and it probably won't be in these next 2 games, I think he does provide an option for you. I would like to find someone else if I can. If I found out that I don't know, I'd like to find someone else. I'd like to be on someone else other than Woodruff in this spot because there's just a lot of risk there. He could very easily tank your lineup, and he's cost a lot, so you need to be getting a good performance from him.
Right. For what it's worth, he's more expensive than Kershaw on DraftKings. So
yeah,
that's what you're doing today. Could see a lot of people still go there because of the lack of pitching options on a 5-game slate on DraftKings. Do think that it's a good tournament play on just everywhere in general because he does have the boomer bust potential to get there. We'll talk about the Toronto LA game stuff too shortly, but I think that we're Xing pitchers off left and right here. So I do think that at least needs to be something to take a look at. Trying to find anything for Milwaukee bats that I like, and there's not much here, especially underdog. Like Yelich is the only guy that has a fantasy point number. Everybody else has hits numbers, which are better than singles, but they're still just half hit numbers. Garrett Mitchell has a half total base number on Prize Picks, somewhat interesting. But yeah, it kind of just. Again, I think that some of these, like while Milwaukee has definitely looked good in the homestand, I also can't ignore that like this is an NL Central division rivalry game where they're going to make additional calls because they know that these games, at least the last several seasons between these two teams, have come down to the last 10 games of the season. So every game counts.
Yeah, for sure. I agree.
There's also just a point where I know this is the last moment or the last thing that I'll say. Like, at some point, these Brewers' young stars aren't going to do well. Eventually, people will start catching on to tendencies, and they'll be able to figure it out. I think it's a lack of tape and reps right now is why they're doing well. So
yeah,
or just I know they're talented, and there's a reason that they're up where they are right now. But we see this quite a bit, where some young guys break out and then they kind of get humbled in about a week or 2.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, let's go ahead here and move on to the Coors game. Washington and Colorado is the next one. Nationals plus 104, Rockies minus 122 at home. We have Mitch Gore going up against Jose Urena. 11 is the total. Shouldn't be shocking to anybody, really. That is what it was yesterday, and look where the score ended up being. So anything can happen with the Coors game. We should pat ourselves on the back for that. I know that we had losing lineups because of it, but still called some really good spots for those pitchers. And honestly, the bullpens did a lot better than I thought that they would. So maybe there are some trends to look at. And we had an interesting conversation after the slate locked yesterday. Do you want to elaborate on that a little bit in regards to pricing?
Oh, yeah, just how the sites aren't necessarily pricing up any of these guys in terms of the hitters and cores. And it's kind of to a point where you wonder if they're doing it on purpose, right? A lot of people will say like, oh, that's a mistake, but these multi-million-dollar companies don't usually make mistakes. So the algorithm has to have a reason on why they're not pricing up guys. It could be just because of the fact that we've seen less runs in cores, it feels like, over the past few years. These guys have become a little bit less viable. So it almost feels like you're getting baited into a lot of these plays. You're getting baited into being forced to play some of these guys. I don't think that's necessarily the case that you should be going by, though. I think you should, obviously analyze each spot and don't feel forced into these spots. Sometimes, like yesterday, you have to. You feel like, or at least you feel like you have to, just because of the rest of the matchups on the slate. On this one, where you have better matchups for other teams, like you have the Dodgers. We just talked about. What team did we just talk about? Atlanta and San Diego. We're going to talk about Toronto and LA coming up. Like, there's better matchups elsewhere on this slate. I would be tempted to say I'm only interested in Rockies. And here comes the hot take of the day. You're looking for that SP2. I don't see a lot of reasons not to at least consider the upside that Urena is going to give you today. Upside's a bad word for it because there isn't much upside with the play, but we're just looking for ground ball outs here. And that's really what he could thrive with. You know, that's who Jose Urena is. That's who he was last year. Had a 50% ground ball rate. For those who don't know, anything above 45% with your ground ball rate is good. Anything above 50% is elite. So he has 50%. He has 50% to both handedness as well, 50 to lefties, 50 to righties. And this team in general has a very high ground ball rate. You go back to last year, how they did against right-handed pitching. Collectively, the projected lineup that we have has a 49% ground ball rate, Jared. Ridiculously high, one of the highest in the MLB. So I could see Urena dealing, man. I could see him just getting a lot of easy outs here. I could see him not giving up too many home runs against a Washington team that doesn't have a lot of power. And I could see Urena being a low-cost SP2 that ends up maybe just completely outscoring Woodruff and completely puts you ahead of the field that way. I'd love to get your thoughts. What do you think on the cheap SP2 call with Urena?
Well, the first thing that stands out, I don't even like. We can acknowledge the xFIP of 5.27. But then the next thing that comes out here is the fact that the ISO, that he doesn't have anything above 1.6, which is respectable. 1.3 against lefties is actually really solid. It kind of gets more scary when you get towards the 1.7 and up into the 0.2 range. But he's done pretty well in that regard. And again, like you said, we're not looking for strikeouts here. This is purely a matchup consideration play. Yeah, the hard contact can be scary. Cores can be scary in general. And he's going to live and die by the ground ball stuff. So if that's working for him, like it has shown to be in the past, now people will be scared out of their mind to play him because if you look at the FanDuel points or fantasy points per game, he obviously didn't do well in his first game of the season, and that's going to weigh pretty heavy on the sample size. So two things to note for Washington, which is why I know that you're on this spot, but to explain to the people here, the ground ball rate for Washington combined for the projected lineup is 48.8%. They only have one guy that hits the ball on the ground less than 40%, and that is Keibert Ruiz just at 39%, which you look at that, and that has to be a top 5 ground ball team in the league. And then the other part here, like you mentioned, the hard contact isn't really something we should be scared about. I understand that Garcia, who they projected lead off against a righty here, and then Meneses, who I respect as a hitter, those are the only two guys, and Keibert Ruiz. So 3 guys in the lineup here that have hard contacts above 40%. So the only way I see Washington being able to hit Urena is if they small ball him to death today. And the ground ball stuff is out of reach for the defensive unit. So that's the way I see it. Did I hit all the points here, or is there anything else you want to include?
No, nailed it, man. I think you're right on the money. One thing I will say about the XFIP, the reason that it is high, XFIP is a very specific stat where, well, expected FIP is a projection-based stat. FIP is what XFIP is based off of, and it's field independent pitching, or fielding independent pitching. So essentially takes all fielding out of it. It only accounts for your walks, your strikeouts, and there's another statistic too. Maybe a hit by pitches, something along home runs, I think, as well. Those types of events when you're pitching. And so, like, obviously it's going to give him a high xFIP if he has a really bad K rate and a somewhat bad walk rate at 10%. xFIP doesn't necessarily account for the ground ball rate. So something to keep in mind is that, like, yes, his xFIP is high, but that doesn't take away from the fact that he's a really good ground ball pitcher.
Exactly. And you can also tell by, like, these aren't as important numbers, but the hit distance traveled numbers are pretty good when you're looking at, like, that's because he does induce a lot of ground balls, right? So the exit velocity average too is pretty solid. I mean, again, those are more tertiary types of things here, but we've kind of nailed that Washington is just not a good matchup for this. And I felt better about Washington yesterday, and that didn't pan out either. So I can get behind this, and I think that's, maybe we take a look back at a conversation that we had about 10 minutes ago where you see Colorado, and we'll talk about them. They should be up near the top of teams that we should be looking at. But implied team totals, you have Washington at 5.7. The Dodgers have now, gone up since the open. They're at 5.6 now. And we talked about how much we like Braves. We'll get to the Angels. I could see cases where you have interest in some Brewers that are lefties. I think I'd probably still slightly put Washington above them. But if we have this take, then we got to put Washington down the totem pole quite a bit here.
Yeah, I don't think Washington's all that far up there. I don't plan on playing any Nationals bats today, and I'm perfectly fine with that. I think you have, like I mentioned, you have better matchups elsewhere, and you have the savings to do it today. So you can go kind of elsewhere on this slate and pick and choose your spots.
This would have been a hard spot to fade yesterday. So just for those who are scared, I don't think you should be scared today. I think that getting Coors right is like, obviously we'll have a lot of main slates with Coors on it, and it's still something that Josh and I we have a hunch on, and how that's going to affect this year, because I don't know if I think moving off of it and fading parts of it is going to be a bigger tool in the tool belt than normal years.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely will be. Let's talk about this other side. Let's talk about the Rockies.
Yeah, let's talk about the Rockies here. They're going to come in with the highest implied total, like we said. I know that Josh really backed Gore in the last start, and it worked out really, really well. Today, though, he runs into a pretty tough matchup here. The xFIP is 4.89. The K rate, pretty good to both-handedness here, 24% to righties, 22% to lefties. Swinging strike stuff looks pretty good. He's allowing a lot of hard contact today, and the ground ball stuff isn't really in his favor here. And so, like I said, this Rockies team, the projected lineup looks like it's going to have one lefty in it, that being Ryan McMahon, who also is pretty respectable against the left-handed side of the plate. Sure, some of the guys in the middle of this lineup are going to strike out, but I do think a lot of these guys have pretty immense upside, and I know that he's not the leadoff hitter, but I think it all starts with Chris Bryant today, because we mentioned it a little bit today, and I'll give it to you after this, but not really a massive blow-up spot yet this season, but he's been right at the precipice of it, hitting another double last night.
Yeah, it continues to look really good. I like the KB spot. Look, at the end of the day, I really don't want to overload on Rockies. I think you have the best stack on the slate with the Dodgers, who we'll talk about coming up here pretty soon. I think there certainly is upside to this Rockies team, but don't forget that Gore is a good pitcher. I think people are kind of discrediting him. Pitched really well in that Atlanta game, has pitched well in Coors before, has a really good K rate. The problem that he could run into today is that he could give up a lot of walks. He doesn't have his control necessarily down pat, but this is kind of a good spot for Coors. So for those who don't know how Coors affects pitching, essentially because of the elevation, it takes a lot of the break off of your breaking balls. So you'll see curveballs be a lot less effective here. You'll see anything slow and moving is your changeups are gonna be a lot less effective here. What you want is a guy who's still able to throw a fastball and still able to throw, has those fastball variants too, like a cutter, like a two-seam. Gore doesn't necessarily have a cutter or two-seam, but in that opening start against Atlanta, he used his fastball 70% of the time to righties, 60% of the time to lefties. So if he's predominantly using that fastball, it should suit him well here. Like I mentioned, the control is going to be an issue that you just have to deal with, but not recommending pitching him, just recommending that you don't necessarily overload on bats against him. So I like Bryant, a low strikeout guy that I can definitely get behind. I'm trying to think of who else I would necessarily want here. I wouldn't mind Profar. I wouldn't mind Profar. I wouldn't mind Daza. I wouldn't mind some of these guys at the top of the lineup. I just want to stay away from like the CJ Crows, the Monteros, obviously you're staying away from McMahon. You don't want a lefty against Gore. But yeah, just staying away from some of those higher strikeout righties.
Yeah, you say you want to stay away from Crone. I probably agree with you, because the K rate is pretty ridiculous, but literally the only guy that's seen Gore more than like 5 times, and he's homered off him twice in 5 at-bats.
Yeah, I
So
guess. If you want to go
there's
BVP on
always,
me, go
I
for
know.
it.
No, probably not today. I mean, we already kind of have that in play with Judge today. So I probably will, just stay on the sideline with that one. But I would expect Cronenbeat to be pretty popular today. I'll at least say that.
Happy to stay away from it, man. He wasn't even that good against lefties last year. I'm happy to stay away from it.
Okay. Yeah, we're taking a very bold approach on a slate where, again, there's 5 games on DraftKings, 6 on FanDuel. I would feel like most industry people would probably say that this game is a must play. If you're looking at game total and implied team total, it's where, maybe this doesn't apply as much as, say, an NBA game or an NFL game. Like, everything is a little bit different, right? But we also just kind of have to approach MLB a little bit differently, and we do that pretty well.
Yep, for sure.
All right, let's go ahead and move on. We got 2 more games to go. Toronto and LA is next, so we're going to take the LA Angels side of things here first before we get to the Dodgers. Right now, the Blue Jays are a plus 104 money line underdog here behind Chris Bassett, Patrick Sandoval. On the other side for the Angels, minus 122 at home. 9 is the total here. 9 is the total here. And so you get the spot for Chris Bassett, where he got absolutely shelled in his first start. Absolutely shelled. Probably the worst in considering the first games for all these pitchers on the slate here today. And so interesting that he would just automatically just get blown up in his first start, but now he gets to face an Angels offense that, all things considered, has looked pretty good to start the year. I will say that. So let's go ahead and start with the Bassett side and say, can we just say that he is not in consideration for anything until we see a better performance from him first?
I mean, honestly, if you wanted to get different than the field, there's no better time to get Bassett, right? Like, he's going to be really cheap price
Sure.
tags around the industry. This Angels team might look good, but they haven't been all that great against right-handed pitchers. Middle of the field in terms of their weighted runs created above average, 24% K rate collectively. Like, of course, you have to face off against Trout and Ohtani, but like, you just got to do that anytime you face the Angels. So I actually don't mind Bassett. I could see him having a halfway decent performance here against this Angels team. Yeah, I don't think the Bassett play is all that bad. Sure, he had a bad first start, but that's all. That's against the Cardinals. Like, that's
Yeah.
chalk it to a game against the Cardinals. That's all you got to do.
Yeah, fair enough. That was also the game I think Gorman hit 2 home runs too, right? Like, they just absolutely shelled him.
I think so. Yeah.
Okay. I feel like I think that maybe we are being a little bit optimistic, me specifically, about the Angels. You would think that they have everything in place. They just can't seem to put it all together, it seems, at times. But yeah, I mean, if you're looking at the K rate stuff, like there's only a couple of guys that strike out under 20%, and as much as we love Trout and Ohtani, they still have strikeout numbers that Bassett could do. So if he's back on his game today and the ground ball stuff's working for him, I could see a spot where this Angels team isn't able to get it together. So there's that, and I think that you're getting him at pretty elite ownership today if you want to go that direction. Now that it brings you with some risk, there's definitely risk associated with it, and not to mention we at least have to discuss the weather of it being 60 degrees and the wind blowing dead center at 10 to 12 miles an hour. So that should be a bump to batters. I know it's not like a huge bump because of the stadium, but yeah, something to consider, I guess. Like, if you're really trying to get different, I think we already have enough on the board saying that we're going to be fading a lot of course. So maybe you don't do that and you just kind of go that direction.
Yeah, for sure. I can get behind that.
Toronto Blue Jays bats here. Going to be a spot where you're probably going to see not much interest. I know that they just came off of a Royals matchup, or a lot of Royals matchups, where you maybe would have expected a little bit more, but we should at least start the conversation with Vlad, who had 2 home runs in the last 2 games here, and it's going to be a spot again where I think that we can at least look at some of these guys in the platoon spot. So where do you want to start with the Toronto stuff?
Yeah, I would say just starting with these guys in the platoon spot, like you mentioned, and talking about who Sandoval is. Had a rough start to the season with that matchup against the Athletics. Didn't necessarily pitch to the way that we thought he would, but I think this is a spot where he could struggle as well. He kind of needs those strikeouts, and he's not going to get many against this team. He's going to have somewhat of a free square in Varsho, but outside of that, it's just a lot of righties on this team that smash lefties. So I like the Vlad spot. I see some upside there. I like the Chapman spot. I see some upside there. I think this is a good team to go to in Toronto and could potentially be a top 5 stack at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think that they have the ability to, right? Like we're looking again for the team I think there's a lot of teams with like a 4.7 implied total to a 5 or in that area. There's a lot of teams that can compete for that today. And I think that they potentially have the ability to get there over a team like the Brewers. Where would you rank the Blue Jays versus the Padres today?
Above.
Okay. So then we're getting into a territory where they can compete with the Braves or Dodgers potentially. And I think that, I think one of the better pivots off of a CJ Cron play could be going to Vlad Guerrero. And it's obviously going to be just as expensive, but I think it could end up paying off for you.
Yeah, also another thing to consider, this Angel Stadium, one of the most hitter-friendly stadiums of the year last year. I think it ranked like 6th best in terms of park factors. So it's a very home run-friendly stadium. You have the wind blowing out, like you mentioned. Should help these Toronto bats quite a bit. So I like Vlad. I could go with a guy like Bo Bichette. I could potentially, like I mentioned, Matt Chapman. He's still on a hot run right now, the hottest hitter in baseball technically. So
Yep.
yeah, I think this is a good stack to go to, man. It's solid, and like I mentioned before, at least on because I think they're less in the competition on FanDuel, where it's very clearly your top 3 is in no particular order: Dodgers, Rays, and Rockies. On DraftKings, where you don't have those Rays, I think you could say it's Dodgers, Toronto, and Rockies. Again, no particular order there, but I think Toronto can replace that Tampa Bay stack in the top 3.
Right. Okay. I think that's a great way to approach that. And yeah, that's why I think that the FanDuel slate having this extra game on it is really enticing for a lot of reasons. But on DraftKings, I think, again, regardless of site you're playing on today, the move is like the Washington call is certainly something that's going to be really controversial around everything, right? I think that goes against pretty much everything that a lot of people are going to say today. So using Toronto as a better, like they are the better offense in general, when you're just putting side by side Toronto and Washington, that's the better side. So I think that's really, really solid there.
Yep, for sure.
All right. Are we interested in anything else in this game? Otherwise, we can move on to the last game here.
Let's move on to the last game.
Okay. Dodgers and Diamondbacks is the last game on the slate. Clayton Kershaw gets the nod for LA, minus 240 on the road. Madison Bumgarner here for the Diamondbacks, plus 194 at home. Over-under is set at 9 for this game. More of the same from regular season Kershaw here in the first one. Completely dominated the Arizona Diamondbacks in Dodger Stadium. Now he gets to go and do the thing here at, I believe it's still called Chase Field. Correct me if I'm wrong there. And
Nope,
one thing
right.
we wanted to note right away, just to start the year, is that at least right now, if we're going by 2022 numbers, this Arizona Stadium is even worse in terms of ballpark factors for hitters than it is in Dodger Stadium.
Yeah, for sure. Well, it definitely is. You look back to last year's stat, this Chase Field spot that we used to target as one of the most hitter-friendly spots in the MLB was actually the second worst park in terms of home runs when it came to park factors last year, and they were in the bottom 10 in overall park factors. So it's not a very good stadium to hit in anymore. I'll contradict myself and say I still like these Dodgers hitters today against Madison Bumgarner, but this sets up really well for Kershaw. I get a little bit hesitant because we know that pitchers who face off against the same team in back-to-back starts usually do worse in that second start. It's been well documented. It makes a ton of sense. If a pitcher or if a hitter sees a pitcher over and over again, they're going to get more used to their stuff. But we've also seen that Kershaw has just been pretty dominant to start out the year. This Arizona team has been really bad against lefties. They have a lot of left-handed hitters that they can't play against other lefties or have to play down in the lineup because they don't necessarily have good hit stuff against lefties. And I think Kershaw should be able to take advantage of that. So I like this Kershaw spot. I think it's solid. I think it's cash game viable. In tournaments, I would definitely be looking for a pivot without a doubt. But in cash games, you take the best spot, and I think this should be the best spot tonight.
Right. I have no issues with it. Like we even mentioned before, he's cheaper than Woodruff on DraftKings. $300 is still $300, and I think that, I think that today, like people will like Kershaw isn't like that's not the chess piece. That's the checkers piece. Like you're playing Kershaw today, and I think that there are other ways around getting different and getting better spots elsewhere. Have no issues pitching Kershaw even in tournaments today. That's how much I like the spot.
Yeah, I can get behind it.
Like there's plenty of ways to get different elsewhere. So let's talk about. I guess I will bring up the one guy who's had his number, but you can argue that it's gone both ways. Is Christian Walker? He has 10 hits and 30 at bats, 5 of those being home runs. He also has 10 strikeouts. So this is going to be a boomer bust type of approach here. If you want to roll the dice on Christian Walker, that's the only guy on this team that has his number.
Yeah.
Which, again, like I said, Kershaw also has his number. So it's
kind of. Yeah, exactly. And I mean, 8 for 20 or 10 for 30, it's hitting 300. Like that's good, but it's not anything spectacular. Yeah, that's all. I'm not interested in the BVP. Let's talk about this other BVP though that I am interested in on the other side with Matt Bum.
Yeah, so these Dodgers have seen Bumgarner a lot. Whether no matter what team he's been on, this Dodgers team, the ones that have been around, those guys, it's a spot where we like to target it pretty much every single year. And, it's gone both ways. There have been times where this has trolled a lot of people, but for the majority of the time, these Dodgers have had his number. And I think that it's going to be another thing that we start with today, and it starts with Mookie Betts. I think that we can take a look here, and he's going to be obviously one of the more I would say, definitely expensive, but I would also say, do you think that there's any chance that people take more expensive bats from Coors and leave this play out?
Potentially. I think it'd be a huge mistake, though. The Mookie Betts play is elite. He's been great against lefties all season long, possibly one of the best hitters against lefties all season long. There's tremendous upside here for Mookie Betts, and I really like the spot. So Mookie's like my number one overall hitter today. Don't see many situations where I don't play him. Don't see many situations where I don't take some props here. I think he could absolutely dominate this spot against Madison Bumgarner. And then beyond that, I like the JD Martinez spot. A little bit of a narrative that you mentioned this week. I'm not sure how much it comes into play. He was on the Diamondbacks so long ago. I barely even remember he was a Diamondback, but he was a Diamondback at one point. So Martinez with the revenge narrative, good and bad in the 3-hole, should be interesting. It'll be really interesting to see if Will Smith is going to be in the lineup because I would really like to play, but because Kershaw's on the mound, Will Smith doesn't catch Kershaw. Austin Barnes always catches Kershaw. So It'll be interesting to see if they end up DHing Will Smith or just giving him a day off. If they give him a day off, then, that's fine. If they end up DHing him, I have a lot of interest because I think the spot is pretty elite for him. If they end up giving him the day off, though, it's because they DH'd Chris Taylor. And if Chris Taylor's DH, then I have a lot of interest in him, too. So lots of Dodgers that I think you could potentially be playing today that end up in pretty good spots.
Chris Taylor is super cheap on DraftKings, 3,500. I think that just need to see what this lineup looks like to have a better idea of what we're going to do with it. But yeah, I could see you getting 3 hitters just fine. And for what it's worth, the Mookie Betts fantasy number is 8 today, which is pretty elite, all things considered.
Yeah, for sure. I agree.
All right. Yeah, I don't have much more to bring to the table in regards to in regards to Dodgers. I just think that they're a really, really good offense, and that's kind of what you need to know here. And like we said, like getting different, if you're already off of Coors or some of it, it's going to put you in a spot to give you opportunities elsewhere. You might have to, it's deciding, because everybody works with the same salary cap, right? But I think also if you're taking Kershaw and locking yourself into a couple of Rockies, you also have to keep in mind that like it is going to be again from like um, a standpoint of like cheap Dodgers bats versus bats in Washington that aren't going to be priced up because they don't do that much anymore. So it's kind of just like you're laying down the chess move and putting the chips in that the core spot doesn't work out. But I think that it's just a really good approach to take today.
Yep, I would agree, man. And still having exposure to cores, I don't think you should be fading it completely, but I think there is upside to fading some more chalky pieces and getting exposure elsewhere. Yeah, but that is it for me. Jared, let's get out of here,
Yeah.
man. We have an NBA show to do in 5 minutes. Any other final thoughts?
I have two quick final thoughts. One of them, we didn't bring up the weather in cores, but I think it adds to our point a little bit. Temp's going to be in the mid 50s for this game, and the wind is blowing in from right a little bit. So,
Yep.
There will be times where our takes of fading cores are bolder than they are today. And again, I know we're not fading the whole thing, but a good time to do it is when the weather is fluctuating right now in Denver. So that makes a lot of sense. The second thing is that we did get notice from the Braves. Michael Harris got hurt last night. Unfortunate, but he's going to miss some time. He's placed on the 10-day IL. And what they have done is they brought in, I believe, Sam Hilliard. Will be playing center field tonight for that outfield, and he's going to be hitting last. So interesting value play potentially if you want to do wraparound stuff.
Yeah, I don't mind that. It also moved up Ozzy in the lineup to the 4
It
hole.
did.
So,
And Sean Murphy's number 5 now.
yeah, I wouldn't mind taking that Albie spot up at the 4 hole now. It definitely got a lot better than when he was at the 6.
Agreed. Okay, that's all I had for right now. Nice little 6-game slate on FanDuel, 5-game slate on DraftKings for those who missed the top of the show. 6:40 is the lock time, a little bit earlier on FanDuel, and then I guess obviously the lock time is 7:20 for the other game. But what if we get? I guess we'll just have to monitor what if we get a delay for San Diego, Atlanta. Maybe that moves the slate time back a little bit.
Probably does. Definitely does. If they end up delaying it before the game, they will push it back. So, I mean, we'll still have top plays out. It won't be any different than if it didn't get delayed. So, just make sure to keep an eye out for top plays. And from a content side, we'll be all good. From a start of slate time, just don't be surprised if maybe you can enter a few more contests at 7:20. All right, let's get out of here, Jared. Thank you all for listening. As always, we greatly appreciate you guys. And as always, my name is Joshua Riemer. Good night and good skill.